everybody. Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. We are here today with Christopher Gerg. He is the Chief Information Security Officer at Gillware. I had to think about that. I was just like, that's a lot of words, but that's about to change. So Chris, can you kind of give us your background and what's going on? Because it sounds like this is going to be a fascinating conversation.
Sure. Thank you for having me on, by the way. And I think my background, I started, the gray in my beard attests to how long ago I started, but I've been doing information security for about 20 years now. Started as a penetration tester, so I was breaking into people's computers and networks for a living, and then went to the other side of the table and did more of the defensive things. I've been a VP of IT. I've been a Chief Information Security Officer at a healthcare company and in the credit card industry. I've been a consultant for a number of years where I've worked with state agencies and retailers and banks and manufacturers and transportation companies. So, been through the ringer, seen a lot of different organizations. And now here at Gillware, I'm heading up our proactive information security line of business. And that's really grown out of our incident response work. I always say that I get the answers to the exam before I sit the test, because we have a team of people that if you get hacked or you get ransomware or some kind of breach, you call your insurance company that you have cybersecurity insurance with, and then they call us. And we're on several insurance panels. And then we get you back on your feet. We figure out what happened, if data was exfiltrated, if we need to do a breach notification of some sort. But then when it's all recovered and the dust is settled, our team started getting the question, clearly we've got some issues or we wouldn't have been hacked in the first place. And there must be something we could do to keep this from happening again in the future. And that's where I came in. And so I'm building out that practice of how to keep it from happening again in the future, and obviously expanding to people that haven't called our incident response team and keep them from having to do it. They're really nice people, but you don't want to have to talk to them if the red light is spinning.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. So I'm kind of curious, when you get called in and somebody's had a breach, how can you tell what data was touched, what data was not touched?
Well, it's surprising at what level things get logged, even if people don't look at them. One of the first things we do is we install software to stop the attack in its tracks. But then the second thing we do is we do a forensic image of every computer, which sounds like a lot, but and it is a lot, but we've got some automated tools to do that. So we take a forensic cyber image of every hard drive and every device, and we do our analysis against those images. So we have a point in time of exactly where it is, and we can reconstruct quite a bit just from that. Like we end up saying, okay, well, they got in from this email, the user double clicked this thing and it installed this tool, and from there the attacker had a foothold on that one machine and they expanded from there. And then we saw them move from this machine to these other machines, and so we can usually reconstruct exactly what happened.
Wow, that's amazing. And can you explain what this forensic image, I mean, it sounds like such a cool term, but if I'm going to be candid, I don't really know what it means. So
it's just a bit for bit copy of the storage on the computer. So essentially we're taking a snapshot of every file and everything installed on that host, and we can then analyze it. And then that includes the system logs and the event logs and all that kind of stuff.
Wow. And now what's happening with you now? You're about to spin off into a new venture?
Well, same venture, just we're going to be doing it on our own. Gillware started in, I think, 2003 as a data recovery company, where if your hard drive failed or you had a server die or a disk array fail, they could get the data off of the hard drives. Like they literally would take the platters out of the hard drive and read the data off of it. I've seen them shave the epoxy off of memory cards and micro solder into the chip to pull data off of memory cards. I mean, it's astonishing how good they are. And out of that grew a digital forensics side of things, where we were doing cybercrime investigations, and we brought on an internationally recognized expert in cybercrime investigations. Her name's Cindy Murphy, and she started doing that kind of work, which then led into incident response stuff. So if you got hacked or whatever.
So can I pause you just for a moment? The whole cybercrime and high level type of thing sounds fascinating. I mean, do you have any story that comes to mind? You're just like where this was.
Well, a lot of times the cybercrime stuff will have to do with, you have two brothers that are running a company, and they've grown to not like each other very much and distrust each other. And it turns out one of them was embezzling a bunch of funds. And so we'll help them gather that information. Or it could be, we had one literally where it was someone who was suspected of murder was shot by the police. The bullet hit the phone, and we were able to recover the data off of that phone that incriminated the person in the case. So, I mean, the stories are great. I mean, we've gotten black boxes from Army helicopters. The stuff that's come in the door is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds fascinating. So I'm sorry I interrupted your story, but it just that piece kind of jumped out at me. It's kind of like, it's not the average IT services, that are going on to support people.
There's always good stories. It almost turns into war stories after a while, because we were all like, you wouldn't believe what we just saw. But so the company, the data recovery side is more diversified in what they do than what we do. And we do a lot of, now it's almost all incident response. Like I said, the incident response firms are very busy right now. And our company's expanded at a huge rate. We've hired about a dozen people in the last few months, and we'll probably be over 60 by the end of the year, just on the incident response side of things. My part of the company, like I said, was brought on to do proactive information security so that you don't have to call those folks. But what we've done is we've secured some funding, and we're going to be spinning off as our own company. And it actually launches next week, Tuesday.
Wow. And what's the name of this new venture?
Tetra Defense.
Tetra Defense. Will that be tetradefense.com?
Yep, tetradefense.com.
And that will be unveiled on Tuesday. Well, that'll be fascinating. And the focus of that organization is strictly going to be the incident response?
It's going to be the digital forensics. So we call it DFIR, digital forensics and incident response, and then also the proactive services. And that ranges from doing assessments to we call it CISO as a service, where we come into an organization that's got maybe 800 employees, and they've got maybe 5 or 6 IT folks. And the IT folks are well-educated, well-trained, but their background is in information security, and they don't have a dedicated information security program. And so we essentially kind of drop in me or one of my team members as an advisor, and we act as the CISO for that organization, where we help them through the year build a roadmap of where they are, where they ought to be, and help them get there. And also we're looking at opportunities for services that we can target that are going to address the stuff we're learning from our incident response work. I'm getting the answers to the exam before I take the test with these incident response folks, because every day we're seeing exactly how people are suffering breaches and having attacks. And so if we can use that to educate our proactive practice, we'd be fools not to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds natural. I'm kind of curious, though, how often do you run into a company of whatever size where the decision maker has trouble justifying spending the money to put the proactive security in place? That they just don't, they see it just as an unnecessary cost. We haven't been breached, to our knowledge, yet. And why? I know I'm reading about it in the news, but it's not hitting us.
Well, firstly, the biggest thing we see right now is ransomware, no question, and it's very democratic. It goes after everybody, and it isn't just targeting specific verticals. It isn't targeting specific types of companies or or size of companies. It's just kind of a broad brush. And if you have the particular vulnerability they're exploiting, you're going to get hit. And the ransomers are getting more and more sophisticated to the point that they really are companies. At times we are negotiating with ransomers, and they'll say, well, I don't know if we can accept this. I'll go have to ask my supervisor. Like, they have a help desk, they have technical support, they've got websites and email addresses, and they actually have multiple teams. They'll have a team that will have a tool that will exploit, for example, like Windows Remote Desktop Service is one that gets hit a lot right now. And so if you have that open to the internet, they've got a team of people that will just go try to find that host and attack it. Once they attack it, they hand off the list of attacked hosts and successfully attacked hosts to another team. And that post-exploitation team will then install tools to increase their footprint in your environment. And once they've mapped out your whole environment, they find where your backups are stored. They find essentially the soft, chewy center of your company. They will hand that off to another team that will install ransomware. The ransomware is usually the last piece. It's not just I double click something in my email and I've got ransomware. They've been in your environment for 4 to 8 months.
Yeah, that's one thing that was fascinating to me as I learned more about ransomware is how patient they are. And I work with IT MSPs all the time, and I have some that we had one that there was a CFO that got an email supposedly from the CEO to wire, I don't know, $100,000, $400,000, whatever. And about an hour went by, and the CEO walked past his office, and he said, "Oh yeah, oh by the way, I'll send that wire in about 5 minutes." And the CEO goes, "What wire?"
Right.
And it was the only thing that saved him.
And that's the second thing we're seeing. We call it wire transfer fraud, and it's any kind of fraudulent transaction like that. And usually, that's not a technical problem; that's a people problem.
Yeah.
Where you need to have a process in place to address that, a procedure, so that anytime you're going to transfer money or wire it, especially overseas, that a second person is involved with that, and you rationalize, is this really a real transaction? We've seen people where the email's compromised. They are just forwarding all the email to their own email thing, and they're just watching. And then all of a sudden a transaction happens, and they respond with an email like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I gave you the wrong account number. Use this account number instead." And then they throw in, "Oh, by the way, have a good time on your vacation to Tahiti. My husband and I went there. We had a great time. All my best." And then they sign it with the name of the person and so it looks very legitimate.
Yeah.
We had a company that was buying excavators and several $1 million worth of construction equipment, and in 4 different payments. That's exactly what happened. And then what happened is 30 days later they got an email saying, "Hey, I thought we were going to get that payment," and it was gone.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm curious about something. You started your career by going in to companies,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you were basically a hacker,
Mm-hmm.
a good hacker, a white hacker, right, or whatever.
Right, white hat.
Yeah, white hack. So you were going in. So I'm just curious. Can this stuff ever be stopped? I mean, can it ever? If you reverse, because you've seen both ends of the spectrum.
Well, it's not necessarily inevitable. And I use the analogy of health, where you go to your doctor and he says, "Do you smoke? Do you exercise? How much do you drink? What's your weight?" And all these sorts of things, and then we'll give you some things to reduce your risks. But if you've got great, he doesn't give you a grade. He just says you need to do these things to reduce your risks. But I could be a low risk from a health perspective, but if I'm looking right when I cross the street and a dump truck's coming from the left, I'm going to have a problem. And the same sort of thing is with information security. The whole motive and the whole approach is to reduce your risks. And there are some fundamental things you can do to reduce your risks. And fortunately, technology has gotten to the point now where out of the box, a lot of things are actually way more secure than they used to be. If I do a Windows install, it does have some security settings already in place. If I install a new Macintosh, it already has some good security settings in place. When I was doing pen testing, things were, it was the Wild West. We would just waltz into these big companies. I was doing some work with a casino, name withheld for obvious reasons. And I was doing this pen test from home, and I'm sitting at my desk at home, and I'm logged into the server that runs the slot machines. So I mean, it's astonishing, and kind of going back, you asked me the question of why is this important? Why should I be spending money on it?
Yeah.
I think the pit that a lot of people fall into is kind of the whack-a-mole approach, where I've got a problem, I'm going to get a tool. I've got a problem, I'm going to get a tool, and you end up with a dozen tools, all of which generate logs that you never look at because you don't have time. And so a lot of times it's a matter of priority. It's a matter of understanding what the big risks are right now. And I think because again, I've got the answers to the exam, I can come in and look at your environment and say, you really should use this tool, or you've got this tool in place, but if you change its configuration, it'll be way more efficient, and will also, by the way, make your IT department work better. And I'm always looking for a big hammer to knock down all those little moles instead of a bunch of point solutions.
Yeah. And so you're gonna avoid problems between different apps, and not talking to one another or whatever.
Well, and I favor automated tools where you set it and forget it.
Yeah, it makes sense. But I still want to go back a little bit and try to reword my question a little better. So if we think of like the United States government, is there anything that governments can do? Is there anything the way the internet is structured? Is there anything that can be done that could attack the hackers? That could attack the hackers, shut them down, make it so they don't have, I mean, like you mentioned the Wild Wild West. It was really funny. Before you said that statement, I was thinking those exact words because I've heard them used before.
Right.
The way it was.
So here's the issue. Fundamentally, these attackers are using tools that are very robust, that hide their identity. So let's use ransomware as an example. When we're interacting with the ransomers, or we see evidence that the ransom attackers are doing work, they usually tunnel it through a VPN, whether it's the Tor router or another VPN. And what that does, it's a virtual private network. And what that does is it tunnels your traffic and you just pop up in another place. So tracing that back is very difficult. And those technologies were made, like the Tor one specifically was made so that people with oppressive governmental regimes that would eavesdrop on their stuff or not let them get access to information would be able to have access to information. So it's a useful tool with a good underlying purpose, but is being used for nefarious things. I talked with someone at the FBI off the record who said that tracking these people down is almost impossible because of these VPN tools. And then on top of it, so you get ransomware, they say, okay, if you want your data back, you need to send us 10 Bitcoin or whatever. And so if you pay them through those cryptocurrencies are built to be untraceable and or very difficult to trace. So they're using tools that were made for good purposes for bad purposes. Just like I could hit someone with a hammer and use it for a bad purpose, they're using these tools to hide who they are. So hacking a back, that sounds great, but you better make sure you know who you're attacking, and doing it across those anonymized connections where you really don't know who you're attacking would be almost impossible.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be a disaster. But by the same token, it just seems that if the tools were created in the first place, there should be a way to at least limit the growth of all these issues.
I think there are some foundational things you can do, again, to reduce your risk.
Yeah.
You need to know where your data is and what kind it is and what's radioactive and what's not, and control access to it. That's an easy thing to say in one sentence, but that's a difficult thing. And for a lot of companies, especially in the US, where data is not private and you can just gather all this information about all these people and just do stuff with it without the protections like GDPR. Knowing where that data is and what you're doing with it and where it lives and how it's protected, that's a non-trivial problem.
Yeah. So if I'm understanding you, it's still the way the environment is structured. It still comes down to each individual company needs to take the extra steps to make certain that they're their data, their environment is secure. There's
Right.
really nothing that can be done on a global or a national level.
Well, there is to an extent. I mean, I saw an uptick in people being aware of these issues and trying to do something to address them when GDPR went live. If you were even a U.S. company doing work with uh, European Union data subjects, so people who live in the EU, you had to have these things in place or you were going to be facing these big fines. And so sometimes it's a compliance obligation that forces you to do it. CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, it has gone live as of January 1. The problem is they haven't quite yet finished writing it. And so I've heard.
Come on. So that's government. They passed the 2,000-page healthcare bill before they read it, and now they do. Now they do this one in California, of course, our home state here. We love you, California.
Well,
they pass a law that's not written.
It's a good idea, but they passed a law that was described by a privacy attorney I do work with as a dumpster fire of legislation, where the enforcement and what they were enforcing and all of it was just a mess. And they wrote it quickly and they wrote it with good intent, but they didn't think it all the way through and kind of explore the edge conditions. And it's the edge conditions and the loopholes that everyone's going to try to jump through or go around. And so that's where they're having a lot of trouble right now.
So for those listeners that do not know, and actually I don't know a lot of detail on it, could you explain what the GDPR is?
Sure. GDPR and actually the CCPA is a similarly aligned thing. It's a set of regulations that say how private your data should be. So if I'm a resident, a citizen of an EU country, I have a right to privacy, and so I can go to a company that is collecting my data and say, I don't want you to collect my data anymore. I want you to forget all the data you have about me. Or I can say, I want to know what data you have on me and where it came from, and how you're using it. And your website, the regulations say your website needs to, in plain language, spell out how that data is what data is collected and how it's used. And where it gets tricky is a lot of companies for a really long time were collecting lots of data for marketing purposes, and just collecting data because it might be useful later. And now they have to know where all their data is, and they have to be able to essentially, like if I called them, they had to delete my data at my request. And if they don't comply with GDPR and someone raises a flag that someone's not compliant, they can fine you a percentage of your company's income. So, and it's like 3%. It depends on how it gets enforced. But I mean, it'd be a real kick. Where I think things are going to, they're having trouble enforcing it. Not a lot of companies have gotten fined, quite frankly. And I think there's another way to approach it. And I'm going to climb up on my soapbox if that's all right.
Please do.
If you're going to have these regulations that fine people, what you're doing is taking money away from these companies that they should have been spending on their information security practices, right? And so this company loses this money. They have less resources to address the flaws that caused the problem in the first place. So maybe we should do one of two things. One is have a safe harbor. If I can demonstrate that I am doing my due diligence, I'm going to the doctor and having blood tests and exercising and all that kind of stuff. But on the information security side of things, I've reduced my risks. I'm doing what I can. Then I'm in a safe harbor. And if I suffer a breach, because I could be looking right when the dump truck's coming from the left, and something happens, I double click something in my email, but I have these controls in place, then I don't get fined. Or if you still want to have those fines, take those fines and put them in an escrow. And you put together a remediation plan to address the flaws that caused the problem. And you have someone run that escrow and they release money from that escrow to pay for the remediation steps. So what you're doing is ensuring that money is getting spent to address the problem, which the regulation was built to address, instead of just taking money away from the organization and making it harder for them to be secure and have reduced risk.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense. That doesn't align with how we do government today, but it makes perfect sense because, the money doesn't do anybody any good except maybe politicians, whatever, to throw it in the kitty of the general fund of the government rather than
Right.
to put it to the use that it's intended to under the law. So it makes,
Well, and
I like your solution.
I was talking to a guy who was one of the government enforcers for HIPAA stuff, so the health information protection stuff, and he was crowing about, oh, we just got this guy and we fined him $250,000 and it might go up to 1.3 million. And man, I'm finding these people like crazy. We're catching all these people doing stuff wrong. And when I asked him, why are you taking money away that could be spent to fix the problems? He didn't have an answer to that. Like it was a completely foreign concept to him.
That's right. That's right. It's not even, it wasn't even a consideration.
But if you're a business owner and you're facing these fines, that's the question you're asking.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I don't know how you work it. In part, you violated the law, so a fine is justified to a certain extent. But as you're saying, if you take all the funds or a lot of the funds that are available, could be available to actually meet the requirements, it's kind of counterproductive, to say the least.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So will you please, I know most people think they understand ransomware and how it happens. Can you explain it in a way that might give people some new information as to something like, oh, I didn't know it could happen that way, or I didn't know that was part of the process, since you're saying that's the biggie right now?
Well, I think the common misconception is something comes in your email, like you have an attachment and you double click it and boom, you've got ransomware. All your machines are suddenly encrypted and a ransom message pops up. That's not how it works in most cases. If it did, it would stop at that machine, right? You double click it and your machine would be encrypted, but none of the other stuff would. And you can rebuild a single machine fairly easily. So what they do is, so over the years, even when I was pen testing 20 years ago, there's a certain way to attack, and there's a conventional way to attack an organization. And these ransomers are using conventional attacks. This is just a normal attack and breach. But the difference is at the end of it, where they install this ransomware. So it might come in through your email. It might come in through a service that you have exposed to the public internet that has a vulnerability in it that's not patched. So
what do you mean? What do you mean by that? Give an example of that.
Let's say you've got one of the ones that's getting hit right now is a lot of organizations for remote access. You have people who work from home, and they need to get to resources that are on your internal network, and so they'll connect to this VPN, virtual private network. They'll authenticate to it with their username and password, and hopefully some kind of PIN or multi-factor authentication, and they get into your internal network. There's some flaws, some known flaws that have patches available for some of these tools that do VPN access. And what attackers are doing is they're exploiting that flaw to get into your environment. So this is an unpatched service that you have to expose it to the public internet so the person at home can connect to it. It might be Windows RDP. It might be your web server. If your web server has a flaw that's not patched. The Equifax hack was actually an unpatched web server. I think it was running in Brazil, but attached to their internal network. And that's how that Equifax hack happened. So they can attack anything that you have exposed to the public internet. Or it can come in through your email. And so essentially what happens is, let's say it is email. You double click a thing. In the old days, a few years ago, they used to have a tool called a banking Trojan. And what it was is a very thin, hard to notice application that would be an attachment in an email, and you would double click it and it would farm through your machine looking for bank accounts, or it would install a keylogger or some kind of eavesdropping tool. So it would try to find banking information, because ultimately these attackers are really after money, right? They want money, and that's why the credit card industry has their data security standard to protect credit card attacks, credit card information from attack. in this case now they've got a real quick way to monetize things through ransomware, and so they use these same tools, these banking trojans, these very thin things that really don't have much functionality. One of the big ones right now is called Emotet. Another one's called Dridex. They always have these interesting names. But you double click this thing in your email, it installs this little shim on your machine that all it can do is download other stuff, and once it's on your machine, they download essentially a Swiss Army knife of hacking. A common one is called TrickBot, and it will scan your network. It will install remote access tools. It will allow that attacker to use your machine as a jumping off point to the rest of your network. And that's what they're doing for the next 4 to 8 months, is trying to map out your network, find where the data is, the intellectual property for your company, and then also the backups, so that if they install this ransomware, you're facing months of downtime to rebuild every computer in your environment. I mean, I can't think of a company right now that if all the computers were unavailable, that they would still be in business, right? And so if they make it impossible for you to recover from this ransomware attack, you're more likely to pay that ransom. And the ransoms have gone up from like $500, a few $1,000s last year. We've had ransom requests come in, or demands come in, over $1 million.
Wow. That's incredible. So they're going to take some months. So are there tools that people can install in their business that if something does get added to their system, the tool picks up on it?
Yeah, there's never like a box of security I can plug into my network and then I'm fine. But some of the foundational things are a very robust anti-malware tool. And the newest ones have what they call advanced threat protection. A good example of those are like Sophos X Intercept with EDR is one of the ones they talk about. Carbon Black is a common one. I'm going to make people mad if I don't mention their tool, but CrowdStrike is another one. One that we use a lot in our incident response work is one called Sentinel-1. And really what this is a tool that's not just a catalog of known viruses. It watches the computer for how all the system calls, all the file transfers, and the activity of the user, and looks for things that look naughty. And it's actually, the newer tools have gotten quite good at differentiating normal activity from malicious activity. So that's the starting point. Let's install some stuff on every system, so that we can correlate across multiple systems. Then the other thing I would say is use multi-factor authentication everywhere you can, because if they compromise your username and password database, if you require multi-factor authentication, whether that's a code that pops up on your phone, or I've got one that brings up a little button on my Apple Watch where I hit approve the authentication I'm trying to do. If they have your username and password, they still can't get to important things, if anything. So your administrators should be using multi-factor authentication. Your remote access should be using multi-factor authentication. And then again, because they're going after your backups, your backup archives for all your servers and your systems should be protected with multi-factor authentication, so that the attackers are not able to encrypt your backups, because then you can recover without having to pay that ransom.
Now, just to ask you a stupid question, but is there any, so they've got access to all the data. They see my username, they see my password. They also going to see my phone. They're going to see my cell phone. Is there any way they can intercept a cell phone text message where they might get that multi-factor authentication code?
Yeah. So it used to be that it was okay for that second factor of authentication to be a text message or an email, but it's become a target for these attackers to. I can impersonate a SIM card, which is like your identity on your phone, and so because of that, the government, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, they're the ones that decide what the rules are for what's acceptable and what's not from an information security perspective for the government. And they say that texts and emails are not okay to protect confidential or critical information, top secret information. And as a result, I don't favor. I think you should use a tool other than text or email for your second factor of authentication. There's a number of tools you can use. Authy is one. Google Authenticator is a free one you can download and use. Microsoft has come out with one called Microsoft Authenticator that will generate one of those 6-digit codes that you can type in, and it changes every minute. You could set it up to just like give you that button that you press. That's a better approach than text or email, because I don't trust those anymore.
Yeah. Okay. I was curious about that. I have both of those on my phone,
Yeah.
but when I have it set up, I'm using it, everybody sends me a text one.
Right.
It's
right.
pretty rare they use those tools.
Well, and it's gotten to the point now where you have to assume that everyone's reading your email. And so, like, if I were to package up a really critical tool and zip it up with a password and I emailed it to you, I wouldn't email you the password, because if my email's compromised and you get that encrypted file, why would I send the key to unlock it in the same channel? So you have to. It's a matter of trust and a matter of risk. And email just goes across the internet. It can be intercepted, and it's getting so that you can, without too much work, intercept text messages too.
So are there tools out there that will encrypt my email?
Yeah, sure.
Is it worth it? Is it worth the trouble? I mean,
well, it's worth it depending on your use case. We do things with privacy attorneys. We do things where we're emailing reports that have really sensitive information in them, and we use a secure email transfer mechanism. But they're a pain in the butt to use. Like, very few of them are actually intuitive and trivial to use. So, I mean, we'll get there, but the technology hasn't kept up with it. I still don't trust email.
So we need to wrap up now, but I could keep going for hours with you. This has been great. Been fascinating. So if you want to close this out, what message would you be giving people based on your experience of working with a variety of companies? I'm not even going to tell you what direction to go, but what would you have as your closing message for our audience as we've talked about these different cybersecurity issues?
Find someone who can help you prioritize appropriately. You are going to have to spend a little bit of money, but more often than not, you've got the licenses you need and you've got the tools you need. It's just a matter of using them efficiently, using them effectively. But it's not something you can just ignore, because I'm seeing so many people get ransomware and so many people get hacked that I don't want to be a fearmonger, but I'm a little bit afraid. So I'm just expressing what I'm seeing. But there are ways to do this in an efficient way and in a cost-effective way. And if you're prioritizing the right things, like we talked about with good anti-malware, with multi-factor authentication and protecting your backups, you can at least, if something happens, recover quickly. So if you don't have that capability in-house, find some trusted advisor who can help you. And if you happen to call my company, that's great. But there are people out there that I think are competent and can help you. The problem is, and this comes from my experience, hiring people that have information security awareness and training is hard. There's not a lot of us out there. Not that I'm special. I just happen to fall into this industry and had an affinity for it. But if you don't have someone capable on your staff, at least find someone who can help you.
Yeah, no, it sounds great. And to what you said, one of our MSPs had a client that got the ransomware notice, but because they were doing things properly, they just told the guy to buzz off, and they were able to just,
right.
take their backups or take whatever they had going on and rebuild.
Yeah, and you have to build everything with the assumption that, like, when I have a computer and I'm going to open up a port to it, like a web server, I'm going to open it up to the internet. When I'm designing everything, I assume that machine's compromised. Like, if I expose something to a very dangerous, untrusted environment like the internet, I have to assume that machine's going to get compromised, and then what can I get to from there? Like, when we're designing a network, that's the methodology we think of. And so if you think of it like something comes in through email, I'm going to assume that a workstation is going to get compromised. How can I protect the other workstations from that workstation? then you start going down the right path.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's great. So close it out. How can people reach you next Tuesday when you launch your new company?
They can go to our website, which is just right now Gillware.com, GILLWARE.com. Next Tuesday, it'll be TetraDefense.com. You can email me directly, and I'll probably regret saying that. But you can email me directly at cgerg, C-G-E-R-G, at Gillware.com or CGERG at TetraDefense.com. Both will get to me.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for being with us. This has been a great discussion. I could keep going. I'm sure our audience really got some value out of this.
Great. And if something comes up and you want to talk about like something in the news or whatever, just throw a line my way.
Well, that might be too much fun. Don't tempt me. Thanks.
I'll come out to California and hang out with you.
Hey, there we go.
I'm in Wisconsin. I don't want to be here right now. It hurts to go outside.
Okay, Chris. Well, you have a good one.
Thank you very much.